Welcome to HSE with Sustainable EHS Consulting, the podcast where we talk about health and safety, environmental management, and sustainability. I'm Barbara Derica, and in this episode, we'll explore how individuals, communities, businesses, and governments are preparing for the impacts of a changing climate. Today, we are going to discuss what climate adaptation means, why it's crucial, and how we analyze it. To set the stage, let's clarify a couple of terms: mitigation and adaptation. While climate change mitigation refers to efforts to reduce or prevent greenhouse gas emissions, like transitioning to renewable energy or improving energy efficiency, adaptation is about adjusting to the changes that are already underway or unavoidable. With global temperatures rising, sea levels increasing, and more extreme weather events, communities across the world face new challenges, whether it's dealing with prolonged droughts, wildfires, coastal flooding, or food security issues. Adaptation helps ensure resilience in the face of these shifts. Adaptation is not just about survival, it's about finding ways to thrive in a new normal. Adaptation doesn't have a one-size-fits-all solution. It differs depending on geography, socioeconomic factors, and the nature of the risks. That's why adaptation analysis is crucial. It helps us understand what solutions work best for different regions and sectors. So, what is adaptation analysis and how does it work? Essentially, it's a systematic process that evaluates how vulnerable a region, community, or sector is to climate impacts and then designs strategies to cope with them. Let's break down the components of a typical adaptation analysis. 1. Vulnerability assessment. This step looks at who or what is most at risk. Is it a coastal city facing rising sea levels? Or perhaps an agricultural community threatened by drought? Vulnerability assessments take into account physical risks as well as socio-economic factors. Low-income populations, for example, might have fewer resources to adapt to extreme weather events, making them more vulnerable. 2. Risk and impact projections. Once the vulnerabilities are identified, the next step is to forecast potential future climate scenarios. Climate models predict things like temperature rise, rainfall changes, and sea level projections. These models help communities understand what they're likely to face in 10, 20, or 50 years. 3. Adaptation strategies. After identifying risks, we move on to strategies. These can be anything from building seawalls to developing drought-resistant crops or improving emergency response systems. But it's not just about technical solutions. Adaptation also involves social, political, and cultural considerations. What's the local governance structure? Are there funds available? What cultural practices might influence people's willingness to adopt certain changes? 4. Implementation and monitoring. Finally, no adaptation plan is complete without implementation and ongoing monitoring. It's one thing to create a plan, but putting it into action requires coordination, funding, and long-term commitment. Monitoring also helps track whether strategies are working or need adjustment. Now, let's look at some real-world examples of climate adaptation in action. Around the world, communities are already implementing solutions to reduce the impact of climate change. Here are a few cases that highlight diverse approaches. 1. The Netherlands. Engineering solutions to rising sea levels. Known for its history with water management, the Netherlands has developed some of the most advanced flood protection infrastructure in the world. Their approach goes beyond traditional dikes and levees. The country's Room for the River project is a great example, where they've actually made space for rivers to flood in controlled areas to reduce the risk of overflow in populated regions. 2. Bangladesh. Community-based adaptation. Bangladesh is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, particularly due to its low-lying geography and exposure to tropical storms. Here, adaptation efforts have focused on empowering local communities to manage risk. farmers are switching to salt-tolerant crops in areas affected by sea level rise, and floating gardens have been developed to help grow food during flooding. 3. California, USA, wildfire prevention and response. As wildfires increase in both frequency and intensity, California has begun developing strategies for both prevention and response. This includes controlled burns, creating defensible spaces around homes, and modernizing fire detection systems. In addition, the state is investing in building codes that ensure structures are better prepared to withstand fires. We've come to realize that fire is a natural part of our landscape. Rather than fight it, we need to adapt our strategies to live alongside it safely. Of course, while adaptation is critical, it's not without challenges. For one, there's the issue of funding. Adaptation measures, especially large-scale infrastructure projects, are expensive. Many developing nations, which are often the most vulnerable, lack the financial resources to implement significant changes. Another challenge is political will. Adaptation requires forward-thinking policies that may not have immediate payoffs, but will protect future generations. Short-term political cycles can often be at odds with long-term adaptation planning. Finally, social equity plays a big role. Not everyone is equally vulnerable, and adaptation strategies that don't account for the most at-risk populations can inadvertently widen inequality. But despite these challenges, there's hope. As more data becomes available and the understanding of climate impacts deepens, we're seeing more innovative and collaborative solutions. Cities are sharing adaptation strategies, businesses are investing in resilience, and communities are mobilizing to protect their futures. While governments and organizations are key players in climate adaptation, individuals can also make a difference. Here are a few things you can do to help. 1. Stay informed. Understanding local climate risks is the first step in preparing. 2. Advocate for resilient policies. Support policies at local, state, and national levels that prioritize climate resilience. 3. Prepare your home or business. Whether it's flood-proofing your property or developing an emergency plan, taking proactive steps to protect yourself and your assets is key. 4. Engage with your community. Community-based approaches are powerful in adaptation efforts. Participate in local climate resilience groups or initiatives. And that's a wrap for today's episode of HSE with Sustainable EHS Consulting. Climate change is here, and while mitigation is essential, so is preparing for the changes we can't prevent. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review if you found this discussion useful. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep adapting to tomorrow.